Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Today, I have a very unique episode for you here. Something we've never done before, where a basically anonymous Twitter follower reached out to me. He was inspired by the job stacking themes that we put out on the podcast. And shout out to Jobstacking. They're actually a sponsor of the podcast as well. But he noticed that we talked a lot about how to kind of stack multiple remote jobs. And this guy who goes by Clearcase on Twitter has independently developed his own philosophies around what he describes as building a consulting company to $1 million. But it has a lot of like job stacking, working multiple remote jobs type elements to it, a little bit of fun Machiavellian type stuff, and kind of how to exist in a remote work environment. So I really think there's a lot of interesting potential here, something that you're not going to hear anywhere else, dear audience. So listen up for this one. Without further ado, let me introduce Clearcase. How you doing, man?
Awesome, Vince. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty much how we met. I've been kind of following your content, really enjoying it while I'm doing some traveling abroad here in South America. And a couple of your posts just really stuck out to me. Like, I took some notes here, and you said, like always be applying, even if you already have a job. Um, Another one I really liked: accept every job offer, even if it's in person or low pay. And if you kind of just look at them at the surface, they might not seem surprising, but there's a lot going on there. And from someone like me who's lived this a bit longer ago, I really understood we were on the same wavelength in a sense. Like we're willing to do the unwritten rules and take those risks because that's what kind of puts you ahead and differentiates from other people.
And tell
So,
me, have you listened to the job stacking podcast for reference?
I have not. I kind of reached out just right away because I knew we'd probably be in sabbatical a little bit, but I'm probably going to follow up with that.
Yeah, a lot of the same wavelength. It's all right. It's not a knock against you. Just for context, they're hilarious as well. He introduced um, he introduced all these really cool concepts. He called it the J2, the J3, job one, job number two, job number three. And he's like, yeah, I got 3 jobs right now. I'm looking to ramp up to 7 remote jobs, all this type of stuff. So
Amazing.
it was very funny and very paradigm shifting, I guess. Um, so really, really cool. But in any case, Clearcase, really interested in hearing what you have to say. You've basically put together a bit of like a presentation for us, and I have the bullet notes. So this is going to be pretty well thought out from the audience's perspective. You've put a lot of thought into this, and I'm really excited to learn more.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for framing that. So this is going to be from my perspective when I was job stacking before it was a thing back in around 2009. So it was over 10 years ago, 13 odd years ago. So I don't know what the culture that's kind of formed around it now is. I'm sure things have sped up a lot, but hopefully there'll be some alpha in what I have to talk about and what I was doing before this was kind of technically a thing. So,
You're an OG.
uh-huh. Well, I'd say Tim Ferriss is the OG, but yeah, I was a early disciple for sure. Um, so let me basically, I'm just going to flesh out. 10 years ago, I was doing this stuff, and I kept noticing a bunch of principles emerging. So in my time off, or when I was, kind of doing stuff remote and going to another country, I'd have time on the airplane just to jot down a bunch of stuff, and I thought I would eventually turn this into a series of like 10 blog posts. So I just kind of kept around 10 principles. And we're going to cover them high level over here today. But I have tons of anecdotes into each one, lots of them pretty funny as to like some of the risk taking I had to do to kind of think outside the box. So we'll get into some anecdotes, but we'll try to keep it high level and short so we can keep this in a consumable time format for a podcast. So quick disclaimer, this is stuff that worked for me in my consulting context, which I'll get into a little bit for the kind of work that I was doing. So take what works and, throw out the rest. To keep things spicy a little bit, I'll probably make some analogies to relationships and dating because things map over surprisingly well, but, it's tongue in cheek, it's meant as a joke and needn't be taken literally, but I'm sure every joke has some truth in it.
All right, let's do it.
And thirdly, there might seem like an element of like, wow, is this cheating? Is this unethical? And I'll get into that because it definitely felt like a cheat when I was, getting 2-3 gigs at 40 hours a week, paying me each unaware of each other. And I was like, man, I'm doing this work in under 40 hours for 3 separate people. But I want to emphasize that you have to be good at what you do here. This isn't some way of like scheming and scamming anyone. Like you have to perform. You have to make yourself good enough to be worthy. And the rest is up to, kind of how the market works. So to dive in, the first principle that I had, if you want to read it off.
No, you go for it.
Okay. Always have greater than one client. So this is kind of the pin that everything else rests upon. This is basically a fundamental must to profit maxing. This is the first thing you need to do is just have more than one client and get into the idea of scaling. So there are lots of advantages to having more than one client. Simply one is just redundancy. So for an analogy, I think a lot of your audience is in this idea of, having redundancy around countries you can fall back on. But if you are just beholden to your home country and you don't have any other options and things don't look as rosy one day, what does that result into? So I noticed that once I started having multiple gigs and I had a little bit of redundancy built in, that everything else kind of rolled over afterwards. Like a lot of the benefits just kind of paid. So that's one obvious benefit. Second, it allows you to compare and contrast. It wasn't until I had like 2 gigs at once that I started defining different client types. So there's certain clients that are good for certain kinds of situations. Maybe they give you fat paychecks, but they work you really hard for short periods of time. And then there's certain clients that don't give you as much, but they're just easy breezy, right? So maybe a high maintenance, a high reward, low maintenance, lower reward, but steady all the time. But it's not as simple as even just those 2 binary options. There's a bunch of different client types. And in the work you do, I'm sure even as like a consultant for people onboarding to new countries, you've kind of figured out, hey, I'd like to work with these kind of people during certain times.
And you can expect that we have a smart audience that understands software development, management, consulting, some of the things that I expect you do. So feel free to use the lingo.
Yeah, I'm going to get into some of the technical details, but I'll still try to capture everyone. Okay, so the ability to compare and contrast, and so that's kind of obvious too. And then thirdly, I remember there have been times where I was working 2-3 gigs, tripling my income, and I was thinking, like, there was a moment where I solved a problem for a client that took 3 weeks to solve, and sure enough, a month or 6 weeks later, it happened at the other client because I'm trying to solve the same types of problems for the same people, and it took me days to solve it for them. And of course, I was able to pass over the value and the savings to them with a much lower bill time. And then this sort of stuff started happening again and again. And then I realized, wait a sec. Actually, not only is this ethical, I should be charging you a premium for the fact that I'm multiply billable. The fact that I could do multiple people at once, you should pay me more because I'm cross solving problems all at the same time. So, just a word on that, like the ethics and the advantage of working with multiple people, you can help a lot more people the same. Even though traditionally, I don't think they'd all be on the same on board with you knowing that, they brought you on, whether as a contractor or full-time at 40 hours a week, and you're doing that 2-3 times. However, they're actually getting more out of the situation. And then finally, just to talk about this last point, it puts you in the position to be able to walk. So this ties into another important principle that I'll talk about. But if you haven't, I think this is self-evident. You want to be in the position to walk away. So there's just a lot more confidence that comes out of being at a client, not being able to push you around if you know you've got another backup. And that, factors into the compare and contrast. But for an analogy, all the stuff that we talk about in terms of, hopping countries and moving where you're treated best or what have you, that's the whole idea. If you're beholden to just where you were born and given a piece of paper that says that, you're a citizen here, and you don't, and things start to go wrong, and suddenly, years down the road, digital IDs or some other form of control is coming in that you're not okay with, and you decide at that point, I need to have options. Not soon enough, possibly too late. So you need to put yourself in the position to walk away. If you're not there yet, just start figuring out how to get. So that's the other advantage of that. So now I'm going to move on to another important principle, and I love that you highlighted this in one of your posts, which really hit home. And it's the idea. I call it constant interviewing. So I'm going to talk about this for a little bit because there's so many advantages here. Number one, you'll know what you're worth. Now I'll give a quick anecdote. There was over 10 years ago, I was early on in my career. I remember working somewhere, and it's kind of out in the middle of the country, and not the highest rates, but it was early in my career, and I was making around 60 an hour. And I'd been there for almost 4 to 5 years, and I kind of wanted to move out to the big city. And a friend of mine had me convinced me to come out, and so I said, let me line up a couple interviews and go out there. I was really excited about the first one. I got the offer, and it was at $80 an hour. It's like a 33% jump, and I was like, I'm sold. Like, cancel the rest. I'm going to celebrate this weekend. And, he kind of pulled me back a little bit. It's like, yo, man, this is, a more expensive city. So you've probably just offset your costs more than anything, but, congratulations, and just don't close any doors. And so I went to the next interview the next day. And for however reason, maybe the extra cockiness of already having another offer, they offered me 100. So now I've gone from 60 to 80 to 100 in just two interviews. I was like, oh my God, done deal. And then somehow I was lining up another interview a week later, and I called them because I was on a high, and I'm like, hey, I've got 2 offers. I don't think I can wait that long, so we'll just pass on this. And he bumped it up to that very day. And then they somehow offered me like 110. And so I'm going to be upfront. This was during the heyday of just the money printing, and not the recent version, but this is pre-global financial crisis. So things were a little hot, and we all know the market does that. But you want to be
applies.
Yeah. But that's why you want to be constantly interviewing, because you'll pick up changes, like what's going on in the market. If things are hot, you'll know, hey, you can suddenly get a 15-20% bump for moving across. But you want to, I got a major change just by testing the market out there. Meanwhile, I had been quietly just working at that gig for 4 or 5 years, and early on in my career, not knowing to be interviewing. Secondly, another major advantage is interviewing is a skill. Probably one of the most important skills you can have. You can factor it over into the dating market. You can look at people who've been married for a long time, find themselves suddenly divorced, and now they got to go out and talk to someone. I don't care how good your game is, and I don't care how good a professional or consultant you are. If you can't see yourself, you'll never see the light of day. You'll never see, get what you're worth. I sucked at interviewing when I first started, but I'm going to get into a little bit more how when you see it as the skill that it is, because you're selling yourself, practice will just it's the brute force way to get a lot better. So one of the things I noticed was, and another advantage of why you want to get good at interviewing, constantly interviewing, is that different people you talk to in the interview process have different purposes. When I was first interviewing, I used to think the recruiters were everything. I used to say dumb things like, hey man, like these are my demands. I want to work remote. I want this kind of a rate. And they just cut me out. I'd never see the client till I realized, wait, these are just the gatekeeper. Just say whatever they need to hear. then move on to the client. You talk to the client differently. That's who you really need to impress. That's who writes your check. And so knowing the roles and who controls what in the room, when you're
Mm.
early on in interviewing, you're not going to know, versus getting practiced at that and knowing who to talk to in what way. And that will also factor into another principle about know your boss's boss, which I'll get. But and then lastly, I've got 5 more points on just constant interviewing, but I'm just going to close off with one other story and then move on. Is like I said, not only is it a skill, but it's a bit of a performance. And if you get really good at interviewing, you can have some, really high moments. So I can remember one time I was brought into an interview, and standard 1 hour long tech interview. And they started off saying, I kind of knew what I was coming in for. Obviously, I'd done the pre-screen, and they brought me in and said, okay, tell us standard stuff. Tell us about your background. All right. Next. What do you know about this tool that we're bringing you on for? Okay. Next. What, how would you solve the following problem with this tool? I had to just stop them after 15 minutes because I was already impressing them with my answers, but I didn't want 45 more minutes of this going on. I kind of just turned the tables because I was further along in my career, and I'd kind of gotten good at this. And this is the first time I did this, and it just was like spontaneous. I turned the table on them and I said, "Hey, look, I just want to pause for a moment and see if it's okay. Can I throw something back at you? Um, what's your current setup and environment right now?" So they explained that to me, and I'm like, "Cool. What are some of your pain points and problems that you're dealing with at the moment?" Cool. I expected to hear those because I was familiar with that situation. What is your solution that you're going to bring someone on for, and how do you expect them to go about it? Explain that to me, and how do you think that'll solve the problem? Anyways, I was then able to explain to them what pitfalls they hadn't thought of in this solution that they thought was the right thing to do, quote unquote. And it was not stuff that they were prepared for at all. So imagine them interviewing you and saying, "Hey, I know what I want to do. This is what we're going to bring you on for." And you're telling them why it's not going to go down the right road. Like 1, 2, 3. So I identified a bunch of pitfalls they hadn't thought. Explained to them that they're moving on to obsolete technology. And of course, I presented a solution saying this is where people are mostly moving to. It's a little bit new you haven't heard of, but not only does it fix the problem you haven't foreseen yet, it'll future proof you for other stuff. So I look at that as even, kind of consulting for onboarding people into countries. Is if I was doing that kind of work, I wouldn't want to call someone and say, "Hey, congratulations, you're moving to South America. How can I help you? What do you want to do?" I'd be like, "Hey, what have you thought of doing so far?" And then tell them, "Hey, this country is actually not as good for this as much as you might think. Here are some other pitfalls with this plan that you might have think you've already ironed out based off of other people that you've already talked to." And as a Sherpa, like a kind of a guide onto onboarding into a new country or going up the mountain, here is the route that many people know. I think once you do a good combination of it, you've really got the route, right? Because you've shown them what they didn't know that could harm them, and you've shown them a solution to that. So I've had a number of moments where in interviews I've been able to just turn the tables and just dominate the room, and that's why I think constant interviewing is a skill your audience would benefit, because I would love for everyone to have that feeling where they just own the situation. And another thing you want to do is that's the moment when you've got them, you're like, because I remember at the end of 45 minutes of that interview when I had their eyes gleaming, I was like, okay, by the way, I'd love to work with you guys, assuming you want to bring me on. um, hey, I kind of would need a certain requirements. I'd like to work remote a couple of days. And, I know I was being brought on at this rate, but I have a couple other interviews going, and I think this is something I could say yes to. So you bring them up to a peak state, then you make your demands. But that's a skill that you got to develop by doing this over.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a few more anecdotes and points about why, but if I haven't hit it home already, man, just keep interviewing. There's no harm to it. You're going to just get better at that, and that's essentially it.
Mm-hmm.
So another thing that you put out there, which I love, clearly great minds think alike, is this idea of every client can be converted to remote.
Mm-hmm.
Now, remember that some of my stories are 10 years plus out. So when I was doing this, like it wasn't a thing, it wasn't common. Like, hey, COVID, lockdowns, remote. It was still a crazy, weird ask. You had to figure out how to, be able to do it and access their systems and so on. But
Mhm.
in every, like, I've had so many clients, double digit clients that there were so many that in my kind of aggressiveness and hunger at the time that I would take on a second client, a third client. I'm like, how am I going to do this? Like, I'd say yes to a situation and be like, I can't go to two offices at once. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I just say yes and figure it out later. But what I
Yep.
want to tell you is it worked every time. I have so many times where I didn't know how I would do it, but it worked. So, I mean, I've had, we can get into one or two anecdotes, but I remember I had one client, this was early on, and maybe not the best idea of a story, but just keep in mind this was like pre 2000, like 2009, I think. And I went in. I had been working with them for a while, some number of months, and it was a big client where they had multiple subcontractors in different buildings around. And I remember they some I would be going on site once a week just to another building to the client, and all the rest of our dialogue was on email. So I had all this evidence of stuff. This was before people thought of asking for remote, but I was like, so the program manager started to get laid off. Something occurred, and now it's just me going to her office. And I just took a chance where I said, listen, hey, I never see you maybe a couple of times a month for status updates. I am happy to still come in for those. But the rest of the time when I'm in another building, do you mind if I, work remote one day out of the week? This was a big ask back then. And I remember she didn't even blink. She just was like, I would love no interruption in service. You're doing good work. I just don't want anything to get worse. So if that's what you need, go for it. And if you know what it's like the first time you have that first day to work from remote, you're getting paid for those 8 hours, but maybe the work text takes you 4 or 3 or 2 or 1 or none, and
It's
you have the day
beautiful.
to yourself. Oh, I mean, it's like this is what I'm leaning into. Forget the getting the higher rate. Like this is what I need to make happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had that moment, and back in 2009, I was like, more important than anything else. Now it's a little bit more of a norm, but
Hey guys, quick break from the podcast to tell you about job stacking. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then Rolf Haltza, author of Jobstacking, guarantees you'll be able to double your income by implementing his paycheck multiplication layering method. This is the exact system Rolf has used to take his own income and those of many others beyond $20K a month. With this method, Rolf contractually guarantees that you'll be able to double your income in 45 days. So, if you're interested in unleashing your earning potential and doubling your income, then click the link in the description and book a call with Rolf right now.
um, so I mean, all of this uh, presumes that you do good work for the client. You're getting your stuff done, and then you should have some wiggle room. So I've got many more examples there, but I'll move on to another principle: the idea of demonstrating high value early. So
I like this.
yeah, the idea here is you create the agenda. You write the plan. He who creates the agenda controls the events. Just ask the WEF. No, but this is essentially about setting and managing expectations, right? You create the game. So the reason I wrote this down, and there's many ways to do this, but I'll talk about one specific. I remember I had one client, and this was early on in my job stacking. So this was my second client in parallel or whatever. And I had done an interview. They brought me on for 6 months, and I remember going in for the first day. And I thought to myself, man, this is like the second or third time I've done this. But the last one, how can it be better than the last one? Because the last one, I'm usually just a hired gun. I go in and I wait to be told what to do. And whenever you do that, the managers don't want to work either. So they're putting off telling you exactly what to do, getting you access until they hit a moment of urgency. too much stuff's piled up, then they throw it all over to you and be like, we need this yet. And I remember that headache. So this time I just had this spontaneous idea when I went to the client. I was like, look, let me try to take charge. I know what I'm supposed to do. I have 6 months, but let me try and see how I can control it. I went in first day and I was like, look, instead of the standard go and sign this and get your badge, I was like, let me just give me access to your server and let me spend a few days. I want to add value early. Like I want to figure out what your current status is. I'd like to give you a report on it. When I first said that, the fact that he didn't need to wait to tell me, I immediately noticed a change in his behavior. Like he started to treat me more professionally because I took charge just by that simple
Initiative.
action. Yeah. And like I started taking the lead. Let's do this. It was an obvious thing to do, but the fact that I said it first, I noticed this guy was like, all right, you tell me what's next. So I took those 3 days and he didn't, because I said, let me start, let me do this. He didn't give me a time frame because I said, let me do it. So I figured out how long that would take.
That's a huge point. If you set the schedule, you can set the deadlines.
You get it, man. You get it. This is totally going to be wrapped into why you want to be the first to say a lot of these. Why it's actually your advantage to set that agenda. It shows leadership. It takes away work from them that they don't want to do, but you commit to what you're accountable to. Like you're committing to what you know you can do with like double or triple the time buffered in for comfort. So after those few days of kind of assessing your environment, I was like, look, I have an idea. Let me present to you what I found so far at the end of the week, but let me take the next few days after that to come up with a project plan as to here's where we are, and then write the here's where we're going over the next 6 months that you have me here for. Here's how we're going to go about it. Again, the guy was like, love it. Sounds good. Let's meet later this week for where we are. I did that. And then I took, again, however many days I needed to write down. So I basically just wrote down on 5 pages of like Word, Microsoft Word. Okay, this is a snapshot of your current environment. I'm going to install this new tool, which is called Jenkins. It's a continuous integration server.
Yeah.
So that's some of the work I was doing back then. Now it's like in DevOps, but I'm going to set up that server. We're going to do a demo of an automated build and deployment for one of your projects running out of Subversion, source control. We're going to set up email. So we're gonna do that, and we're gonna do that in parallel with your current environment, and then you can do an assessment evaluation of like how the new system works versus the old one in dev. And then once we're happy with that, we'll move on to a prod environment, and then we'll switch over to all the different projects. I wrote out this in 4 pages and just said, you know what? 4 pages, 4 months. This will take 1 month. This will take 1 month. This will take 1 month. And then I broke it up into like 2 week segments. Just fucking made it up based on some prior experience and presented something that was like, and I was like buffering in, like, if this is going to take a month, I knew it wasn't going to take me more than 2 weeks, like while I'm comfortable. So in comfort, I had to take 2 weeks. So I was doubling up and I couldn't stretch it to the 6 months that they gave me. So I was like, man, like if I stretch it to 6 months, they might catch on that I'm buffering in too much room. So, but I presented the project plan that way, like the second weekend, and he was like, sounds good to me, man. Like, I love it. All I knew was he was going to go take that to his manager and say, here's what I'm going to make that guy do. So he could look good. But because he didn't know what to write. And so I just think it's a win-win. You actually don't know how many ways, and they're happy that you're taking control and have a map for how things are going to go, even if you make it up and are going to figure it out as you go along. They're happy, but second, in terms of what you do know, you're controlling your approach. You're signing up to what you can do, and you'll figure out the rest. Mm-hmm. So let me go from there on into the next one. But yeah, this actually made me think. One more anecdote. This actually made me think, like, if I was like a consultant, just to talk about, country onboarding. I know a lot of people in your audience kind of follows along with that, but just to make an analogy, if I was a consultant for country onboarding, I don't want to be like, yeah, what do you, what would you like to do? I would be like, here, we're going to create a 4-month plan for you. Here's how the first month is going to look in terms of documentation required on week 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll create an entire pipeline. You can track that pipeline every time you log in. Every month that goes forward, a new month will become available. Month two, language and cultural expansion. We'll have like dates signed up for your weekly online Spanish classes. We'll have dates signed up for your appointments for apartment rental viewings, et
Mm-hmm.
cetera, et cetera. Like I know I'm going to do this. Let me just plan it all out and put some dates to it. And someone who's going to come onto that and say, this is their sales, like, hell yeah, man. Like, this is a lot of substance. And I can now just close my eyes and let them call me and get a calendar notification. We're on to the next process in the pipeline. And I can see beautiful metrics like this has turned into green, green, green. I'm past this part. I'm on to. So um, that's the advantage, I think, of you just taking control and doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So that will now moving on to another principle that goes well with demonstrate high value early on, but under promise and over deliver. So there are lots of ways to do this and lots of advantages. But I'm going to focus in on one for the moment because it has like, you get a lot of juice out of it. So one of the things I'd done for this client when I created that project plan up, that was out 4 months out, I'd said, look, what I'd like to do is, in terms of status updates, I'd like to just do demos for you every 2 weeks. Maybe we'll do 2 to 3 a month. And that way you can not just trust what I'm saying in terms of what's working. I'll show it to you. I'll visibly demonstrate. And at first I thought I was taking on more work than I needed to, but I know they loved it. The idea, because I was signing up to prove that I was doing what I said to do. But again, I was able to control the agenda in terms of how I delivered those updates. It just seemed, just a more consultant kind of way to do it. So I remember when I would do a demo, I would just be like, this week we were supposed to get this project on board into the dev environment and your email notifications going. Here you go. Watch this, watch this. In a demo or PowerPoint type slide presentation, it's just more pleasant visually to watch. So you can get a lot more oohs and ahs. So I remember it was just like a couple of people in the audience, like my manager and maybe one other dev, but they just sat back and were passive versus them saying, show me this, show me that. I had a whole thing. And they can kind of just sit back and enjoy the show. Um, and after like the third week, they just stopped coming to the demos because they knew I was taking so much initiative to show what was going to be done. They were like, "Fuck it, we trust you. You got this. Just don't bother that guy, man. He's on top of it." And another thing that they really liked was in the early demos that I was doing was um, is this idea of always give them something extra. So maybe this is a common sales technique. I happened upon it myself, but I remember in an early demo, I said, "Hey, I've done everything. We've showed you everything we talked about for this week. Questions and answers. Before you go, I'd like to show one last thing. We hadn't talked about this, but there's a tool for static code analysis. It's kind of early, but it's added a lot of value for some of my other clients, and I've got a lot of experience around it. I know we didn't talk about it. Set it up. I'd like to show you some." Oh man, the amount of favor it won me to do something like that. I remember I was like, these folk are really happy after that meeting. Like they saw something they weren't expecting, and I followed the guy right back to his office right there and then. I was like, "Hey, listen, I'm glad you enjoyed that. Look forward to 2 weeks out. By the way, I need to work remote for a couple of days next week and the one after. Is that going to be okay?" Instant yes. Like, yo, do what you need because I was giving them more than they expected, and I was kind of in charge. So I think the right moment to kind of get your leverage. So, but you have to be demonstrating value and
Mm-hmm.
and doing that
On a
kind of
high
stuff.
note.
Yeah, so it was definitely like giving them something extra. We all see it in Steve Jobs's classic "Oh, and one more thing," which he's iconically known for. And when I used to deliver those presentations, he'd give you a banger at the end. So it's just a great psychological trick that pays off. Also, demoing, if you're not good at it and you sign up for it, is a phenomenal skill to have, just like interviewing. If you get good at presentations and demoing, there's a good chance you're not going to be the chumpy dove with dev, um, and kind of sitting in the background. They'll put you up front, man. Like get the microphone, lead the room. Help make these sales. So it's just a good skill set to get in front,
Yeah.
make sure everything
What
works.
makes a good presentation or a good demo?
Preparation. That's it. Like just prepare and rehearse the shit out of it. Um, there's obviously a lot of other things, but it honestly doesn't necessarily matter. If you could giving a boring subject matter, but you've rehearsed it well, you won't just be looking at the slides and talking to them. You'll be looking at the audience. I think audience participation is good too. I used to go to a lot of Tony Robbins stuff.
Mm,
So if you've seen that guy like dominate a room, it's intense, man. I mean, he knows how to
damn. I
sell.
thought we were talking about slacking off. This is actually working hard.
Well, you work
Actually,
hard.
actually preparing.
I mean, that's what I was doing to get ahead. But the great thing is that the hard work up front led to like
Yes,
tons more reward on the other side, right? Because
for
when I was able
sure.
to demo, like you do the hard work of the demo once, but you're delivering it over and over again. It has residual returns, but not as much
Hmm.
work, just like if you record it.
I remember in Suits, the TV show, if you've seen it.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, yeah, so Harvey, he would always just say something like, when I came into this law office, I was working 100 hours a week the first year, and then like afterwards, Harvey just like acts like he runs the place. He barely even shows up. He barely does any work, and he just always justifies it because the first year he was doing 100 hours a week. And so it's kind of that thing. It's like if you stack a lot of the work up front, as you put it, how did you put it? Deliver high value early. It kind of gives you the license um, to take the pedal off later on.
Yeah, you nailed it. You're just shifting like average work across the whole time a little bit, like maybe a little, not quite 80-20, maybe 60-40, like 60% work up front, just
Yeah.
a little bit extra so that you can win over the trust, which you need to do with every new client, So hopefully
Yeah.
your engagements are long, but for me, I was turning over sometimes every 4 to 6 months. But, they say all's well that ends well. And I think all's well that starts and ends well. There's just a lot of stuff in the middle where as long as you get it done, you control that. But I've had tons of repeat clients now. So I know I'm doing good work for them. And my realized rate is my business. If it took me 10 hours to do 40 hours of perceived work, that's plenty of time for me to do other work or um, do what I'm interested in.
Hmm.
So now let's move into an important point around the idea of always be in a position to walk away. Um, there's a lot of wisdom, I'd say, that's packed into this one simple rule. Uh, if you're willing to walk away, you're going to have far more negotiation leverage. Um, this basically ties into having more than one client because it's a lot harder to do that, if you don't have something to fall back. The same reason we're doing passport stacking or resident. You don't want to wait till things get tough to see what your other options are. So, along with constant interviewing, like let's say you're on the dating market, if you're not constantly like out there and you're a little bit of what you're worth, and you're having problem with one relationship, and that's your moment to try to figure out what to do, you're not the best strategy. But certainly in the area of consulting, yeah, you want to be in the position to walk away. There's a scene from Office Space, I think was the movie, where that character walks in, where they hire a bunch of consultants to do a round of layoffs, and he walks in and they're like, yeah, blah, I can't remember the scene exactly, but they start getting into like laying him off, and he looks like he just doesn't even give a shit. And the way he's acting, they end up promoting him. So there's an air that comes with the confidence of knowing, like, I don't have to be here. Yes, I want to be here. But if you've had a bad boss and they have a power trip or what have you, if they whiff that, you know that they can kind of lean unfairly on people who are, kind of need to be there. So if you know you can walk away, if someone tests you on that and they see you can push back, they know to at least give you the respect at that moment. It happens in relationships all the time, early on in dating. People test each other. I think it happens one way more than the other way. But if as a guy, if you're able to stand your ground and not let someone get away with bad behavior, because you can walk away, you're going to get, hopefully due respect after that. But certainly in contracting, um, okay, there's stories around this, but I think I'm going to keep moving to another important concept. So I don't know if I have the wording for this really good, but I just put it as your boss is your boss's boss. But what's
Mm-hmm.
actually more important is that's kind of confusing, but like know who your boss really is. I don't like to use that word boss, but know who writes your check essentially, or who not just, who signs your check actually. So kind of know what's going on there. So I'll just give a quick anecdote, but I remember one time, this is a little bit earlier on in my career, I was already fully remote on a gig. And there were subcontractors that would come in and just change every couple of years. I've been working for them for a while, a couple of years, I think, and a new subcontractor came in. But just imagine there's new management for some. And these are kind of the middlemen. Yes, they're a consulting agency, like I answer to them, but I knew who the client was, you know, was something else, right? Not just this consulting agency, like a whatever, KPMG and whatever. They all work for someone, but all their infrastructure puts them on top of you. So um, the subcontractor, like my middleman, changed, and our consulting agency, like some management, and they were like, "Wait, you work 5 days a week, remote. Nobody else does that. Sorry, that's finished, and you need to start coming into the office." And I've been doing this for a year, working remote, and I was like, "That's not what I signed up for. I'm doing good work, and like, why is this change occurring? It's not the agreement I had. Blah blah blah." Dude, I fought with this guy for like a month. I was willing to just quit at that point because the advantage I had from working remote was just not worth what was a great rate, well around 105 an hour for like maybe 10 hours of work a week. And I was like, damn, I don't want to give this up. But this guy, I can't come into the office. I mean, so, back and forth. And he was like, listen, maybe I can let you do four, maybe like, but I mean, the headache I had talking to this guy. And one day I was like, I'm ready to quit. I need to figure out a problem with this. And it never dawned upon me that I could just go to like who I was actually working
Above
for.
him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like I had to tune that dial to like really be like, where is this coming? Like, what is my alpha like advantage here? Like, I'm ready to quit. And of course, like when I reached a breaking point, I'm willing to walk away. Like, I know I suggested that to him, but he was like, fine, we can't move on this. I went to the client who I rarely ever saw. I had to kind of even look them up a little bit. I know, but they were responsible for writing my check. I said, hey, listen, I know you've seen my emails flying around. Like, I know there's a new sub in there. You hired them, but this is an agreement I had, and basically, I'd like to continue doing the work that I'm doing. Here's what I'm doing, and I know you see my name, but I won't be able to because they're making a change that I never really signed up. She was like, let me take care of it. That's all she said. And that afternoon, that same guy called me back, who was pretty much my manager, and apologized to me, and said there will be no further issues around this matter. Please carry on the good work.
Woo!
That's the moment where I realized, man, knowing the right person and knowing that relationship is actually like where the power. Like I just realized it's actually not who you think is in charge of you or writes that check. That's really it. So you got to know who you're working for, who makes you happy. You got to have that. So this was an important, hard lesson to learn, but it plays in everywhere. Certainly around recruiters, and sometimes you can get around the recruiter to the director who's in charge of those recruiters. Sometimes people are more minions, and you can move up and present a better offering, and you'll just skip right past all of it. So just be aware there's levels, and if you know how to cross them, go for it. So this is another one that you put out there. Another principle was the idea of never fully leave a client, that I'm going to move on to.
Mm-hmm.
I think I thought I heard you say something like that, but if not, I'm sure you're on the same page. But the first time I understood this, I was again. This is another instance from being early on in my career, and I had been working for a client for 4 or odd years, and I had to move out of state. And I've almost never, because of this rule, ever flat out left a client. Like I never quit. I just keep them and just add another one if I needed to. But in this case, it was early on. I hadn't started stacking yet, and I was like, I'm gonna I'm gonna move states, and there's no remote work idea certainly across states. So I had prepared them for it. But I talked to a friend and he was like, hey, you know what? Never close a door. Just tell them, hey, I'm moving. But if you ever need me to do work, I've been here a long time. I understand your systems well. Give me a call. I'm happy to do stuff remote, part time. I let them know. Sure enough, 2 months later, they called me and they're like, we need some help with some stuff. When you leave, trust me, they're going to need your help. So it's up to you how to take advantage of that. You're writing the rules. You've got nothing to lose. You're leaving anyway. So I was like, oh, wow, I didn't expect that. But hey, listen, I actually need a raise because I'll be working extra hours above and beyond my existing job on the weekend. But you guys are good to me. I'm happy to do that. But I need a raise to justify that a little bit. And I can probably do 20, 25 hours. I must have billed about 25 hours weekly for 4 months. And that was on board with the kind of work that they gave me. They signed up for like, hey, this will take you 25 hours. I didn't spend more than 5 hours a week doing it because I knew that system so well. And when I looked at my income at the end of that year, it was like 1.5, what I made, like just from 3, 4 months of like, yes, extra work, not partying as much or what have you, enough to like, oh, you know what? I'm going to buy a Porsche before anyone in my like friend circle, peer group ever did that. I didn't do that. I'm not into that kind of thing, but the difference it makes is when you realize, hey man, like those,
Startling.
oh God, like you're like, I don't need to look at things as one client or 40 hours, all kinds of granular stuff, like, few hours here. Basically, it opened me up to the idea that I can work 20 hours a week, 25. I could do retainers. I started getting into doing retainers, which I thought was only a legal term, but I'd leave a client and be like, hey, I'll only charge you 40 hours a month and you have me for 10 hours a week. Should you need anything? Because I set up a lot of, mission critical stuff.
That's cool. That's smart. Hey guys, quick break from the episode to tell you about BitRefill. BitRefill allows you to shop online and in person without banks, converting your crypto directly into merchant balance. We're talking gift cards to Nike, Amazon, Apple, Airbnb, Hotels.com, and many more, all paid for with crypto. BitRefill offers more than 10,000 gift card options in 180 countries all across Latin America, including Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, El Salvador, and many more. You can also apply the code MyLatinLife at checkout to get 10% back on your first purchase. Go to bitrefill.com for more information.
Yeah. I just winged it, and I must have been something I learned off of Suits as well. So, but I had to just put in every angle. But you'll get a lot of ideas on your own. But all you need to remember is never fully leave a client. Like you don't need to close that door. There's always extra stuff.
Because the company's still in business, and the stuff, and
You've
people act like the
invested.
company's like dead to you just because you leave, but it doesn't have to be that way.
It's an old model of thinking. It doesn't make sense. You've invested years or months into the relationship. You've done all the work of getting their trust. You understand their stuff. All the basically like sunk cost. Like doesn't make sense to throw it away.
Mm-hmm.
So there's got to be a way to leverage that in terms of a more granular approach. Hey, I can do part time over here, etc. And of course, if you keep that relationship going with part time work, like they would always, my other contract would finish up. They'd be like, "Can you work full time now?" And I pick them up fully. So I had many repeat clients that way. But the old model is like, "Oh, I left. Look at your resume. I used to work here. I left there. Now I've moved on. I've left here. Now I've moved on." Like you're closing all these great doors for places where you've put a lot of investment in. So just something to shift the way you think about it.
Yeah.
So another principle that I want to move on to is this idea of one step backwards, two steps forwards. So this is something where I learned. It's just basically the idea of seeing the big picture versus watching one metric and being like, just number go up. A good anecdote around this was I remember this happened to be early on in my career too. I was with a client and they it was a similar situation where management changed or sub changed, something happened, but my rate dropped 15%. I fought it and I knew I couldn't win this one. And being early on in my career, I was still used to the model of quitting and going somewhere else. It's like I was making 110, $100 an hour, 105 an hour. Now you're down to 90, $15. Hell no. I'm not going to go back that much. I was barely working like 20 hours a week or 25 hours a week, but still, no one wants to take a hit that big. So I remember like thinking about it for a good like couple of weeks, and I was like, okay, I can't. Sorry, but I wasn't working remote. So I was working 25 hours at the office, but okay, fine. So I said, you know what? Let me just keep this job and see if I can go remote. I don't know anyone else is doing that, but let me try it here. I'll take the 90 and see what can happen. And I went in and said to the same manager, I was like, hey, I'm fine, but I'd like to go fully remote. Otherwise, yeah, it won't make sense for me. It wasn't a hard fight. Um, and they were able to basically let me do that. But when I went remote, my 25 hours of work that I actually had to do suddenly dropped to like 15 the first couple of months. You know, it was 15 hours a week. And eventually, dude, I was down to like 3 or 4 hours. Um, so like less than an hour a day, getting paid $15 less per hour. But my realized rate was obviously much larger.
Yeah. The
And
true per hour.
correct. And then that was one of the early moments of me moving into Jobstacking.
Mm.
But the idea I want to get across here is if you're just focused on one part of the equation, like if
The
you're like,
top
oh,
line number. It's like an
you,
effort. It's like an effort to compensation ratio.
that you should actually be looking at versus my hourly rate.
Right? Like an
So,
investment banker, they're making barely, not even double what like a normal university graduate would make. I don't know what it is these days. Maybe a normal graduate gets 75K and an investment banker gets like 110K or something. But if you do it on a per hour basis, they're actually probably getting paid less because they're working double the hours, that kind of thing.
oh, exactly. Yeah. Um, so that's a great example. But I think for people who can't even pinpoint like how that matters to them, just be careful and be aware that there's a lot of ways that this can pay off bigger by doing what initially seemingly looks like taking a step backward. Maybe it's like around moving countries. Like, what? I have to live, in South America, dude. I've got to take a huge pay cut, 50% haircut to work remote at a different job that allows me to live abroad. And then you realize, well, your expenses drop by at least 50%, or something you couldn't even do back home in terms of health, being able to eat healthy, get more sunshine, eat natural fruits and vegetables that haven't gone through some kind of processing chemical.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's things that you're actually just not aware of in the equation yet.
Yeah, I maybe you haven't seen some of these tweets because it might have been before your time, but I would say you should be willing to take a 30% pay cut to work remote. And it might even work out that you save more per month if you go to Latin America, you have a lower cost of living, etc.
Yeah, I think I came across. I didn't connect it right here. I was borrowing from that implicitly in this example. I probably have come across that, and I've got a lot of good content out there on kind of even the fruits and vegetable stuff I love. So yeah, we're on the same page, but the I just call it one step backwards, two steps forwards because
Yep.
there's a lot of moments where you'll miss out on the bigger picture opportunity, the bigger gain if you're too focused one component and kind of map it over to consulting and clients that you won't see the big pay until you realize, oh, fuck, I did this, which looks stupid, but now it results in playing it at a whole other. So yeah, that kind of rounds us out to the last thing that I put in there, and I just basically call it break the rules.
Hmm.
And yeah, throughout the examples, I've been giving here, there's just to get different results requires a different set of thinking. Um, you know, I kind of remember reading one of your posts I thought was pretty funny. I think it was pretty sure it's you, where you're like, I have friends or people, acquaintances that I meet, and it's now their fourth vacation in Miami in like 3 years. And they're like, oh, should I should I really try going South America? Isn't it dangerous? Like, isn't it sketchy? Like, isn't this happen? Can't you get sick? Violence, this and that. And I've had friends come over to me over the years, curious about my success and outsized returns in the game of contracting. I was pulling numbers, man, like 500K plus a year, and I was traveling too, and my friends were standard, 80, 100K, 120K, some gig,
Hmm.
and they'd come over to me and be like, "Oh, are you sure contracting's safe? Doesn't it take a long time in between contracts where you can't find work and then you're losing money? Aren't you at the risk of being fired? Before the full timers? Is it secure?" It's all this stuff, and so I kind of eventually realized, some folks are just playing within the lines that were drawn for them, and that's okay. It's fine. But if you want extraordinary results, you have to do something different. So I think this ties into a lot of the nomading. The folks that are in your audience are already on top of some of this. They're doing things that are a little bit different. And also with the passport stacking, like in everything that I've kind of said, you're going to have to look for the arbitrage, and that means not following the herd. So yeah, that's a bit of that on that, and that's pretty much what I have on these 10 principles. So um, happy to leave it open.
I'm gonna add like a soundtrack, like woo, like a stadium. Dude, that was sick, sick. 10 Commandments presentation there. Amazing. I'm down to keep going and kind of follow up on a couple things. If you have a little bit of time, I think one of
Absolutely.
the
Yeah. I think I wanted to get through that because I just had a format, but now let's open up a couple questions that you might have that I think you'll help your audience as well.
I'll put it to you first. You got through your 10 Commandments, and I'm sure there were a couple things, places where you wanted to expand a couple times there. If you had, just let you continue your train of thought.
Um, well, one thing I just want to remind people is that this stuff is a little over 10 years old. So I was doing this maybe not when so many people were doing it. It's kind of popular. So there's just some contextual stuff there. But there's a lot of strategies, and things have gotten easier with remote work out there now. I will say, like, yeah, man, like I'm kind of, here in South America bouncing around a little bit. I still pick up gigs. I love it because I love the kind of work I'm doing. I'm very good at stuff technically, but I'm not stacking as much anymore unless it makes sense. And stacking, I now just look at it as taking on multiple clients. We're
Hmm.
aware of it. But I needed to do this to get to the point where I could kind of go to sleep on just the 5% interest rate kind of thing and not need to do something if I don't need to. So
Hmm.
um, some of this is required, but it's never been more accessible. It's never been more possible. So if I was doing this then, like, if it's interesting to somebody out there, I'd love to see in the comments people share some of the crazy stuff out that they've been doing. But I won't get into it in this podcast. We can certainly do a follow up, especially if your audience members chime in. But I've got some crazy stories of stuff that felt like out of a Mission Impossible movie scene. Like I remember going into a client with 4 laptops in my bag because I had 4 gigs, but they were like, "We need you in the office Tuesday, Thursday," and another one was like, "We'd like you come in Wednesday and Friday," and I'm like, "Fuck it." And if that's what it means to get $420 an hour or whatever, like the other two are remote. And I'm like, I need them all in case anyone sends me a random email, even though I put a lot of them on autopilot with, kind of controlling controlling the plan and how I'm going to lay things out. but I had to put a KVM switch in the laptop and jigger something where I'd walk in and plug it all into one monitor and keyboard and be switching at that client who required no work from me, but just kind of wanted to see me there Tuesdays and Thursdays. You know, another interesting thing I remember was there were moments where things really were like intense, where I was like, how am I like, I've got like, I've done like one headphone in each ear and been
Yeah,
listening
yeah.
in on two stand-ups or whatever. And I
Uh-huh.
hated those feelings so much. I was like, this is bullshit. Like, I'm just playing some stupid game that they need just to get this extra money. It's low-hanging fruit. It makes sense, but I feel like an idiot being like a chump. Like, I don't need to be at the stand-up to do good work for them. So I kind
Right.
of played with that initially, but I was like, I just looked at myself. I felt like I was wearing a clown hat to make money. Okay, fine. I'll do it when I needed to, but then I kind of got out of that. But there are moments where I was solving problems out of sheer necessity, like because of the limited time I had. And I realized when I looked at my output over a small period of time, I was like, damn, there's all this genius probably locked up inside of you that will never come out until you stress yourself into that situation. You
Hmm.
know, you probably never run a day in your life, but the day for you need to for survival, climb that mountain, like you'll do it.
For sure.
So yeah, just a couple of things to mention, but yeah, but
Hmm.
what would you be curious about?
In some of the job stacking conversations we've had, so there's three job stacking episodes totaling almost 7 hours, I think, across the three. So we've done a lot. We covered, some of the ethics of it. And we talked a lot about this, about the stand-ups. We talked a little bit about KVM switches. Would love to hear a little bit more about what that was like back in the day, because you barely even had like Zoom and Skype and some of this stuff 10 years ago, and it was like not working to the same level it is now. Microsoft Teams, whatever. So I'm curious, kind of how you were doing the multiple stand-ups and the kind of like keeping appearances in multiple jobs at the same time.
Yeah. Now, actually, to our benefit, because things have become remote, more common, they've formalized stuff around that. I've
Hmm.
kind of played with the VR stuff. I'm pretty into VR, and I played around with um, Meta Horizons, which is workrooms, I think it's called, and it's like they're making it so you could work virtually, but like in the virtual office. It's gonna suck. It's like a nightmare for what we're doing unless you learn figure out how to hack that too. But there's a lot of more tools that are built to do monitoring and keep you, like
Do
people
you
will
think it's
do like
easier or harder because there's
it was
maybe
easier
more
back then.
non? It was easier back then.
Yeah, they didn't have all these tools. There weren't so many. Everything was sometimes things were email. I'm like, just send me an email. I'm not what chat. There's no chat software. Um, so I'm not always available. And I had to kind of pick certain situations. But to get into it just a little more, my situation, why it worked well was the reason. Also, you want to kind of do a little job hopping and experimenting with contracts is eventually you'll find. So I have a lot of intelligence and strategy that I could kind of like guide people on how to get what I call a honeypot contract.
Mm.
There's certain things where you realize like this is the best girl I've ever had. She doesn't ask me for anything and she's just good to me. Right? So or a country,
Exactly.
whatever you want to
We've
call it, right?
we've talked about this a bit, like what are the good and bad characteristics in a company that you would look for? We've talked about the size of company, and we found that, like, for example, if the company's too small, you're too visible and there's too much responsibility. So you want like maybe a medium-sized company. Sometimes you don't want a company that's too big, Fortune 500, because sometimes they have too good of systems and security and stuff like that. So sometimes the sweet spot is like an anonymous middle market company, like a paper company or something, and you kind of just melt into the middle type of thing.
Government, man. Government is just a lot of stuff in government will take care of that for you. You won't
Mm.
go directly for the government, but you could all the subcontractors, maybe defense contracting firms. There's just a lot of let's just say like unoptimal, like non-optimal room to kind of, just yeah. And I don't think what I'm saying is controversial. Like government's known to be bloated and
Mhm.
have a lot of waste in there. So you can do good work there despite having to push it. In fact, good work is penalized in government. That's what I usually found. If you ever try to get ahead, you're going to make everyone else look bad. So yeah, so there's strategy around that for sure.
Interesting. And would you have to spoof your location at all?
No, no, no. I once considered just being like, I mean, I was pretty happy, like within the country, just within the states, bouncing around. No one really, actually, no, I did. Yeah, I was definitely going abroad. So I only know one instance where they were like, you can't, but I don't think they had the software to like enforce it. And what I would do sometimes is like set up a VPN locally, pretend I'm in a South American country, and then log in and see if anything was flagged. If nothing, it's not being monitored. Um, and then I bought like a router and put some VPN software on there to say this router
Mhm.
is from this place in this country, US,
Yeah.
let's say out of like New York, and everything I connect to, like wherever I go, will be onto that router, so I don't like have any goof ups happen. But to be honest, this does not even play a factor. Like I didn't ever have to back then.
It's a now thing.
But I don't know too many people. Like I was just where I was. I had a whole digital nomad group come here for a month. And there were people from Microsoft and Facebook there. Like I asked the Microsoft person, "Wow, they're letting you do that?" She's like, "No, I just didn't tell them." She was here for a whole month. So this is look. I didn't put this as a principle, but a lot of the stuff is don't ask permission, ask forgiveness.
Yep. This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Jobstacking. Introducing Rolf Haltza's Paycheck Multiplication Layering Method, a revolutionary approach that redefines the traditional career path. This is Rolf's new Done With You program where he'll work with you to implement job stacking for yourself. With this method, Rolf contractually guarantees that you'll be able to double your income in 45 days. So, are you ready to step out of the shadows of job insecurity and step into a world of career abundance? Then just click the link in the description of this episode, book a call with Rolf, and start walking the path of unleashing your earning potential with job stacking. That is a good principle. Another concept I wanted to double down on was perceived value, where it's not really about the butt in seat, it's about the value that you provide. And that's how you can sort of like stretch these hours where, you know what I'm saying, where it's not really about a 40-hour week, it's about like the perceived value, the output that you provide in that week. And if you can get it done in 3 hours, great.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just look. I often thought like, am I a 4x? Like, am I a genius or something? Like, and I'm like, I can't do this in every other area of my life. So I brought up the point that you do have to be good at what you do. Like I kept doing it, so I kept getting better and better.
Mhm.
But there was no way they were going to give me $400 an hour or even 200. There's caps on these rates. So if you're 2x, 3x, 4x efficient, they're not going to like reward you. In fact, if you are four times as efficient, you did something in a quarter of the time, they shouldn't just pay you four times. They should pay you like six, seven times because you saved them a lot of time too. It's not like
Right.
down to the by the hour. But that didn't exist. So everywhere I went, I was probably getting stuff done faster than they thought, anyways, and still not, I still had tons of room to get. So never did I think like, oh, am I like getting away with this? Like if they believe that it's going to take this long, fine. That's how it played out. In fact, I would just be like, you tell me, what do I do? Now that doesn't work well in certain other roles. I've actually got friends in developer roles and Android and so on, and they're like, man, I couldn't do this, not where I'm at, because I've got a Jira board and it controls me like for every 2 hours. It's got
Right.
me outline.
That's
And
how you know that's a red flag. That's a
yeah,
red flag if they're controlling every 2 hours. You want that chill manager, right?
definitely. I don't know. I'd be interested in trying it. I'm sure I could figure out a way to get around it. But definitely the stuff that I was doing, they were monitoring things, but it was. I do know the government stuff that I did. It was, man, like there was one gig where um, I had to break stuff on purpose so that emails would come in, so I could look like I was doing work. Because like weeks would go by and nothing would go wrong. So I just like maybe have to take a server down, have some emails come in, and be like, "Oh, I fixed those," so I could put on my status report like I had to fix it. Now, I mean, that's just a kind of a funny story. Like there's just many different stories, but yeah, in terms of perceived value, like I was playing by the standard rules. I mean, I think if they hired someone intermediate or the average person, this is how long it would take them. So as long as you're in a situation that's not like micro managed and monitored, and they're just like, can you take a day or two or however long to do this, whether it's out of seniority or in the type of work that you do related to, whether it's DevOps or I don't know, some things fit better than others. Or you use strategies like, I don't want to be treated like, let me jump the gun instead of you telling me what to do in terms of granular tasks. Let me
Hmm.
come to you first and give you the big picture and say, I'll put out a 4-month plan for boarding you onto this country and let me control how each of those things looks. And then I can buffer in that time.
Hmm. Sounds like a lot of this comes down to having a specialized skill set that you can just reapply over and over again. And it's just like, it's like you have the hammer and then you just go around to every company hitting the nails. And it's another analogy, a better analogy would be like a plumber, where it's like, you have the plumber skill set, and you get $300 an hour, and you bear $300 a visit, and you barely show up for 20 minutes, and you charge $300 because you have that specialized skill set. So do you think it's kind of that plumber thing where, you know what I mean?
Well, one, I would say if we just think about almost everybody out there who's in tech, I don't think anybody is working 8 hours a day. I don't think anyone. I think, sorry, like there's always the 1% engineers or whatever. I don't know. I heard Google and these kinds of things can be tough. I heard they can be, but every time I talk to someone from there, they're doing okay. Like they're not cranking it. Um, and then and because we lose this going to the office, but I remember when I would go to the office, I'd see everyone's like got a lot of time for like lunch and all kinds of other stuff. And I think there's just a general understanding that the way things work is you just get your work done and that's okay. I think my bosses knew that I wasn't, I didn't need 8 hours of work um, to do this. They weren't squeezing me. They were like, this is comfortable. There's buffer in here. We get it. We have the budgets.
Hmm.
This is just how it is, and just get the work done. And we're happy. We're okay. The problem is if you couldn't go remote, you couldn't leverage that if you were hungry enough.
Into the stacking.
Right. If you were
It's like
hungry
it's
enough.
like any in-person tech job is really only maybe 15 hours of real work a week, and the in-person component is just a lot of drinking coffee and getting lunch and useless meetings basically. And when you go remote, you can remove all the useless meetings and the lunches and the waiting for 5 o'clock to come around, which opens up your ability to stack because the less babysitting basically. That's kind of the idea. But the idea is that like all tech is pretty chill.
I think so. I think the only people who are really struck not saying that are the independent folk, kind of startups and indie hackers and people doing their own thing. But they're doing it for something they love, hopefully with a payoff. I
Hmm.
really admire them, and I sometimes feel really guilty that I'm like, why didn't I start a business? But every time I've talked to people, most of the people who started a business and doing their own thing, there was a lot of struggle. Like I was like, I do not regret what I did because I made a great, great money, and it was easy. It was reliable. I went to people who had the money. I didn't love every moment of what I was doing, the tech stuff. It wasn't my passion, but
Hmm.
put me ahead.
So why not build like an agency around DevOps or whatever, and then hire some people to do the real work? Interviewing basically just becomes sales calls, and it removes the whole semi deceitful element of this, where it's just like, look, we're a DevOps shop, we can come in, bing bam boom. And and i i I understand, I kind of have an idea of why, but I'd love to hear it from you, why it's better to be an individual contributor and stack versus the agency.
This is, I mean, totally a logical question. I've gotten it before many times. In fact, my friends really push me on it. But when I would just look at it, look at what you just said as the next step function, evolutionary jump up. It's like when some
Mm,
character that you're working, like when it like whatever does like fire
eyeballs.
comes out, yeah, it's like it grows to that and it just stays that way. So it's like kind of whatever like or multiple order multiple of
Charmander,
jump.
Charmeleon.
Right.
You just
So
wanted
when
to
I
stick at like a solid, chill Charmeleon, not become a Charizard, draw too much attention or something.
I guess, man, because I started off as like, little Mario and like found my first mushroom. I first was like full time. I was working full time. And really quickly someone was like, you got to get on contracting. Don't become a full time wage slave. Move into this world, 1099ing. And I was like, okay. The first time I did that, boom, huge disruption for about a year, trying to everything settles down. And now I'm like, okay, now I'm playing this. Then I went from like going from the $50 an hour range up to the $100 an hour range. And I was like, boom, level up. Okay. Let it settle down for a few years. Then I went from working 1 gig to two, three, four. Boom, another level up. Now it's not $100, it's two, three, 400, whatever an hour. Um, and that point, I reached my next point of scaling because at this point I had pretty much maxed out what one person could do.
Right.
One person with a good brain on being good at what they're doing, but we're maxed out. And I was like, the people were like, now your next level up of the character is you multiply. Like you literally have like multiple versions of you somehow. You got to scale. And to be honest, I struggled with this because I had multiple times I'd run into this. There'd be times where people would be like, you're really good at this. We need you here. You're a repeat, consultant here. Like you we'll just, they wanted me to interview like three, four more people coming on to solve, to work on the stuff that I was building out. It was
Yeah.
just so logical.
To be your
But
team.
one, I struggled with like conflict of interest of saying to them, hey, if you're going to do this, let me go. I have a corp already. Let me just bring some people on. You pay them. And it was finicky for them because they're like, what's my real motivation here? How much I can bill and wearing the hats of being a director and like an employer and like a recruiter kind of person or that.
Mm.
But in other cases where I could have gone back to a company and just said, hey, I'm starting fresh. I can come and solve this problem. To be honest, I just put it on myself and said I couldn't make that step level function like jump up because I didn't know how to think like that versus just a really good tech hired gun surgeon at what I was good at. I tried it, but it's like when you are in charge of a consulting company, you need like someone a bit of a director capacity, someone in a program manager capacity for sure to manage the two three resources. Possibly there's some hiring, possibly there's some like sales, payroll, etc. It's not a big deal. You can kind of hire people. It's something I would do now. Um, and actually, I'm not sure I would do that now, but I couldn't make the jump at that time.
Yeah, it's fine. Um, I think it's cool how you do it. I feel like what you're doing is like the highest ROI in terms of like low effort, high return, because it's hard to be a real business owner and all that type of stuff. And even the getting the gigs is way harder. Like hiring an individual contributor is pretty easy. It's just like, cool, background check, boom, you can start 2 weeks from now. But hiring quote unquote an agency or a company is like a longer sales cycle, different people approve it, right? It's like this whole thing.
Yeah, I definitely know people who play in that game, and when you put in the time, it definitely has big payoffs. Once you get to be an approved vendor, and I definitely had that opportunity working with some people. They're like, "Man, just come on to our team. You be the person who does our requests for proposals. You've been in the government for a while, etc." And I was like, "I'll partner with you. Give me a piece of everything," but I do not want to go through the effort because they spent a year becoming an approved vendor
Yeah,
within federal.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
so I was like, it's not my thing. But yeah, I agree with like how you put it. I was the best bang for the buck for where I was at.
Yeah. So switching it up a little bit, we'd love to maybe just get, one or two more stories or insights as we start wrapping up. Do you have any good stories of like butting heads with HR, for example, and the negotiation that has to happen with HR? Because we talked a lot about the boss and the boss's boss and the perception within the team, but sometimes there's these externalities like HR that have to be contended with.
Sure. What do you mean in terms of like salary?
Could be salary. It was a little bit open ended. It could be just maybe they were anti remote. Really, like anything that comes to mind.
Okay, well,
Maybe it was like you versus HR versus someone else, and there was a conflict.
okay. I mean, yeah, recruiters have been the bane of my existence. I hate to say that because I know over the time they serve a very important function, and if I were to play in that role, I would appreciate things from their perspective. But we were definitely like pitted up against each other because at times I was like, I'm just fighting this person for my fair cut of the rate. I don't know. One quick story that maybe comes to mind. I don't know if it's perfect for what you're looking for, but it felt nice. Um, was I remember I went into okay. I went in. There was a gig at $40 an hour when I was already halfway past my career. I was used to making 100 plus, and I was like, "Dang, why should I say yes to this? Why should I even do this interview?" But I was like constant interviewing. Like, forget it. Just get your foot in the door and figure it out later. That served me so well because what's advertised on the door versus what is doable from the person on the back, there's just completely two different things. There's so much room for like change on the other side if the person, likes you. The stuff they put on the door is like everything they do to keep riffraff out or the lowest common denominator. So I remember this gig and it was like $40 an hour. You got to do this, that. And it was a bit of an intermediate role. And I interviewed and she was like, "Can I submit you at 40? You got to go sign this, you're committing to this." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, all good." And then I went into the client and I just kind of blew them away. I was like, "Hey, these are things that you're not ready for." I'd actually introduced two new technologies, future proofing where you're headed. You're bringing me in for solving a build problem. I'll do this deployment stuff. And I remember like most of the way through the interview, he went out and the hiring manager got his director to come in just to meet me, listen to what I had to say. "Can you repeat what you had said, in about 5 minutes for my director?" And then I went back. Oh, and then I even said while I was there, I was like, "Listen, I know this is an on-site gig, but assuming this is going to go forward, you guys are really interested in some of the stuff I'm offering. I would need to work at least a couple of days remote, and I need a bump in the rate because not a bump in the rate. I was like, this is at 40, and I haven't done less than 100, 110 at all." And I went home, and they were like, "Okay, let's talk. We'll figure something out." And I went home, and the recruiter called me, and I guess she hadn't talked to the client other than we want the guy. And she was like, "Great. Looks like everything went well. What do you want to do?" I was like, "Well, look, I'll need a bump in the rate." And so as a recruiter, she's used to that because she's like, "Well, I submitted you at 40. Looks like you're going to ask for a little bit more." Okay. She was like, what are you looking for?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to ask for 110." And I, I heard like spit, like water, like fly out of her mouth or something on the phone. And she was just aghast, like, just like, "I could not go back to that's more than double." Like, and I was like, well, you will go back to them. I had a good interview, and it's your job to do that. So she called them back, and they were. She called me back and was like, "Oh, I did not know, like, you had a separate conversation with them, and they were willing to possibly bring you on in a different way." So um, I got that 110, and I was able to work off the bat at 2 days remote. So I don't know
That's
if that
epic.
exactly gets you, but in almost all
Yeah,
the
that's
stories,
epic.
oh yeah, like, I mean, that moment when I hung up the phone was like, oh, just to stick it to that recruiter. Like, I know they're not my enemy, they're trying stuff, but they've burned us so many times. Like, when you just get
Hmm.
fired without any warning, or
Right.
I've had people like hold paychecks for just to have leverage over me. So just to get that power of like, listen, you're just in the way, okay? It's between me and the client. They want me, send over the paperwork. And it's every time like that. You got to know who somebody's lynch, like who's somebody else's weaknesses. So I knew the recruiters, they're done if the client is not happy with them. I've had many situations where if my client, but the person, my manager, the person who I'm doing work for every day, who I talk to, who I keep happy, this recently happened where um, someone was getting really late in their payments. And I was like, I'm just going to stop working. I'm going to call my manager and say, I'm just stop working. He's like, well, do not do that. I'm like, I'm telling him, you guys are, delinquent, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying anything like rocket science here, but I just thinking about it along the lines of who are they vulnerable to? And it's important for them to know
Hmm.
that, the relationship is not between you and them. It's between you and the client. So even HR answers to that higher up. Um,
This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Bit Refill. Bit Refill is the best way to spend your crypto in Latin America. Purchase gift cards or mobile refills from more than 3,500 brands in 186 countries instantly, safely, and privately. Visit bitrefill.com for more information. That's sick. Um, explain for people who don't understand the dynamic between HR and the knowledge worker and the company, because I probably still don't even get it, where it's like the HR is almost, they're trying to, sometimes there's different incentives. Sometimes they get a percentage, or sometimes they're getting like a fixed rate and they want to hire you for as low as possible, where it's like, look, we're going to fill this role for 100 and we're going to try to get some guy in for like 45, and we're going to pocket the 55. Or sometimes it's like a percentage and it's like, oh, 10% of their first year salary, right? So sometimes like the HR is compensated differently, or this isn't even
well,
HR,
HR
it's like
is
the
it's
recruiter. Yeah.
it's a recruiter. Yeah,
External
it's going to be some
recruiter.
agency or something else in the middle.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you're kind of stuck to who you go in through. So if you've gone in like third level down, um, if they were the hungry ones who got your attention on some job board, there's ways to get around that. You might have to do some sleuthing to find out higher up the chain via LinkedIn, or if you're connected inside the look for the same job
Right.
with the same
Do
key.
you ask them like what the incentive structure is? Do you ask the recruiter like how they're getting compensated to make sure everyone's aligned?
The only thing I've typically asked around government related roles was, are you this, are you, who's the client, who's the prime, who's the subprime, which basically just tells me how many levels down. And at each level, I'm taking a haircut. So if they're like the third, I probably don't want to. And I could probably through some questions get around to who the second is. Um, if no, I probably won't be able to get them to say that's what it is to how much they're um, taking. But yeah, in terms of negotiation, obviously my job is just to like knock it out of the park in the interview with the client. Just do my best impression there, and then come back. And to be honest, I don't have I don't know if I'm good at this, but I would just ask for like a big number. I would, if they're like, I'm going in at 90 or 100. surprise the client and I'll be like, I would like 120, and I might, because now I know that they're just going to come back with something that's, if I ask for 105, they'll be like, okay, do 102. But if I ask for 120, they'll come closer to what they can do versus going too far off of that. So if their top line is 110, they should just say 110 if I'm over it in my counter. So whatever they give. Sometime I don't want to quibble about $5. I used to. Sometimes I don't care. Get me in the door. I want leverage. Let me do good work, and that gives me leverage. Most of this contractual stuff, like I've never left a contract prematurely that I could. Maybe there was that one time, but it was a forever contract. Like it just kept renewing, and it went on for 4 or 5 years. But most of these, I almost all of them, I did to term, and they were 6 months, so 4 months. Um, but they're at will. If you wanted to, you could leave and use that as leverage, saying, I need more. But if you don't get what you want and you feel like the rate's not good, just put in the amount of work you're willing to. Now some people are doing the quiet quitting kind of stuff. So you might just say, this is what you're going to get out of me. And my priority is here. I've got another stack and it's going to pay a little bit better. And I'm happy to do good work for you, but it has to be, uh, compensatory to the market. Now I'm talking about situations where you really feel like you're getting less than what you're worth, but you kind of had to take it for the moment and prove yourself. Because, things have gotten aggressive and there are a lot of like down the chain recruiters who are just throwing it crappy rates for.
Right. And your philosophy is kind of just take it anyway.
I just do the interview at the very least. By the way, this game is not something I've been actively playing for the last however many years because it kind of reminded me just some of the stuff you said, and I want to dig up all the stuff I've written and note it down because I just thought there was some alpha there. I never kind of put it out. So nowadays, I'm not in need or hungry to work like stressful 2-3 gigs. It didn't seem stressful back then as much either because I was younger. But now I'll just take on stuff for 6 months or however long, maybe just like one good client for a year. But if something's at like a low rate, like 40, 50, I don't think I could. But if I did, there'd have to be something in there. Like it's a startup. There's another payoff in there that I'm angling. So this idea of one step back, two forward, there's just some other payoff. Maybe I get introduced to the right kind of people. There's a real cool technology. So I'm not like focused on the money as much anymore. So I can see that pays off. But that's going to be up to each person's like spectrum of like how bad do I want it? Like I'll just take anything because there are times where I've done stuff like that and it added to my bottom line in a big way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would at least do it once or twice to figure out what it is. If my assessment after the end of the year is like that sucked, I don't want to do those anymore. Or you find a way to leverage it, then fine. But I would do it once or twice just to figure it out, just to be like, okay, that's what this means to me. There's some value here, or you know what, I learned the hard way. I never take a shit job. But there might be something in there.
It's interesting. So if anyone wanted to get into this a little bit, they're working a full-time job, they think they have a skill set that they could be a contractor, what advice would you have to them?
Well, contractor, I don't know if you necessarily need to be a contractor, but that's the first step I would make is just see if you can get into contracting. It could open up a door for you never thought. There's a lot of subtle stuff where contractors are treated differently than full-time people that I had no idea. And it's actually usually better.
Usually better.
Yeah. Are you confirming that or are you questioning?
I'm surprised.
Oh no, it's like I remember every time layoffs occurred, there was always a full-timer getting laid off before when tech cuts happen in tech, there's a lot of like they need to reduce headcount. I know it happens both ways, but I remember seeing like, oh, like they keep laying off these full timers. Like I'm making way more than them, but they're getting cut. So I've seen stuff like that. I think they treat you differently. They don't tell you what to do in the same way because there's just a professional
There's an authority
line.
frame, right?
There's a bit of that frame of
Like a
professionalism, like you.
mercenary frame. It's like this guy's in here to do a job type of thing.
Yeah, you're not like the soldier who's got a captain who says drop it and give me 20, whatever they need done from you. It's different. You control the show a little bit. Even though a lot of the times, dude, I was brought in, like I just said, I'm available for contracting, the whole 1099 corp to corp thing, but I sometimes sat right next to the full timers, did the exact same stuff day in, day out, went to their pizza parties, like took their free available training. Like you couldn't tell the difference. Even I didn't know. Um, but eventually, there is like by the book, if you just look at the GPT-4 definition, the difference between, full-time versus consulting.
See, because
But
here's sorry to interrupt, because you're actually presenting something new to me. Because I had this theory that FTE was better. Because my thought was contracting, because it's per hour, that there's more of a per hour mindset and maybe a higher output required mindset, when where it's FTE, you're getting paid every 2 weeks, every month. And so it's more like, we just kind of keep them around and that kind of thing, like bench player type of thing in a way, or like, or just that every day doesn't really matter or count quite as much. And so there's more of like a long-term frame
mhm,
versus
mhm.
with the contractor, maybe there's more of like a short-term, we need results now type of frame. That was kind of my thinking. So I thought FTE would be more chill.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, there definitely is. That's the official kind of idea of a contractor. But in more than half the cases, I was like a contractor shouldn't be on there for much more than a year if you're brought in to do stuff specific item, specific specialty thing. I've had tons of gigs that were like 4 years, 5 years, not tons, but like close to half. And I was like, I'm pretty much full time, and I have a major edge in taxes. Um, and when the work is getting done, I'm basically doing the same thing, like in terms of expectations of a 40-hour work week. It's the same thing. So I'd say more often than not, it's like that. I don't know if the gigs that you're in or you've been around, you've compared, if you found out who is a contractor, you might actually be surprised. If you were back at the office and looking around, you might actually be surprised to learn who's a contractor or not at the end of like that Outlook, contact. Because
Mm-hmm.
you'd think, man, this guy's been around for a year. This lady's been here for so long. No, they're managers, they're program managers that are brought in as contractors. This is kind of a very often a decision that's made for like a via budgetary incentives or motives. So they just all fall into one big flop, and we don't really know. Um, but once you become aware, oh my gosh, I didn't realize these people are actually contractors. That means I could just wear a different hat. Suddenly, it's the same thing. I'm here all the time, still a 40-hour thing. Yeah, I don't get paid for vacations or healthcare, but that's way more than manageable given the savings that I'll have in terms of some of the taxation stuff and the higher rate, the higher pay. So maybe you have one full time gig if you still feel safe, but in all of this stuff that I did, that none of these were. I hated full time. I was, oh my god, you're going to take like there was a major difference in how much they paid you. It wasn't like if they pay you 100, there was no way, man. Like back then when I was doing this, it was very much 100 an hour plus, and that's roughly 200K a year. Those salaries
Mm-hmm.
back then for what I was doing was not 200K. So,
Mm.
and I actually, yeah, I didn't mind switching it up every now and then. I didn't need to have like forever because I could scale up and down. I don't mind working a little bit hard for a short amount of time. Like if I was doing 2 gigs. By the way, my average like ratio is not more than 50% utilization. Like if you pay me for 40, the perceived amount of like work that you're getting is never taking me more than. I was always like 1 to 4 or 2 to 4, you know, for how long it would take me. So I had capacity.
It's
But
good
if
numbers.
I think that's what it is in tech. Like you said, people are working 20 hours a week for 40 hours, the real work's
Yeah.
taking 20. So you're just more efficient. You don't participate in the beers and other stuff. You do what you want with the rest of it. But yeah, I would definitely say turn yourself on to that idea of what that there's actually might not be a lot of differences between contracting and W-2. And I would say for folks getting into it, I mean, it's just whatever you'd tell someone to go book a ticket to another country. Like, I shouldn't need to convince you too much. But hopefully, this podcast is enough to be like, because I tell you, I have friends that are 10 years now into it, and they're still asking me the same. So if you're going to do it, you're just going to do it. You just kind of have to get over your fear. You can, this is, you know, there's two kinds of doors in life, one-way doors and two-way doors. This is a two-way door, man. You lean into it with your full-time gig, take on something part-time. Maybe you do like Fiverr or like the other online, gig work thing, Upwork or what have you. But I'd say just go and get some real thing that's like a 4 month kind of thing, and you can always back out of it. If nothing else, I think you could learn something that could open up a whole new world for you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Amazing. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, there's always follow up content we can do if there's a lot of positive engagement around it, and then we can get into some more interesting stories and a follow up if people are interested.
Absolutely. We'll have to figure out some way to have you back on in some capacity. I'm thinking maybe have you and the job stacking guy like together, mini roundtable, something like that. That could be cool. But we'll figure it out. Mr. Clearcase, anonymous Clearcase. Thank you so much for doing this. I knew this was going to be worth it. I knew this was going to be a sick episode. So thank you very much for sharing all the alpha and sharing a whole career of experience with us. There's no one who got this far in the episode that didn't learn a ton. So thank you again for doing this.
Thanks for having me on.
This has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Again, my guest today, Mr. Clearcase. I'll link his Twitter in the show notes. I'm sure it'll probably change or something and it'll disappear at some point. So if you want to get in touch with him, do it fast. But thanks everyone for listening, and thanks again to Mr. Clearcase.